Hello, and welcome to the Daily View. Well, we're taking our journey through the solar system, and we're going to leapfrog, and we're going to land on Mars. Boy, if you read the mythology of the Roman god, one would consider the imprint of Mars to be quite frightening. It's one of the most interesting things about the way in which the nature of the planets have been interpreted historically. If you go back to the very beginnings of what is commonly known as astrology, that is Western astrology that was developed in Babylonia. If you go back to the Babylonian astrologers, the nature of their description of the planets, and of course it was limited to 7 planets at that time, their description of the planets was very black and white, if you will. A god of war was a god of war, and it was as simple as that. And one of the most interesting things about the nature of the planets themselves is that over these thousands of years, the planets have changed. That is, the way in which we describe their energy, despite the fact that there is a continuity that goes back to the original black and white of it, that there has been an evolution, if you will, in the way in which we describe the imprint. And of course, the fact is that it is an evolution. In other words, that, as the consciousness of the planet has developed, as human consciousness has expanded, then it's been open to higher frequencies of recognition. In other words, that, we're no longer limited to the primary imprint of any particular planet. We've already transcended that to a point where our interpretations are quite sophisticated. It is not uncommon today to see this blending of astrological understanding with modern psychology and modern philosophy. In other words, that we're able now to extrapolate out of these very primary imprints a vast nuance of description. So what does that mean in relationship to Mars? And by the way, when you think about the fact that it's one of my favorite topics, the neutrino and the neutrino with mass were imprinted as a byproduct of the neutrino with mass. The neutrinos go pouring through Mars and they come through us, and we are impacted by the transition that takes place when they oscillate as they move through Mars. And that Martian imprint is carried into our crystals. But something to consider, just because the sentence ends there doesn't mean that the neutrino ends there. It's one of those things about the nature of the neutrino is that it is rather difficult to capture one and hold it still. These are things that are keeping on moving. And so one of the things to keep in mind about our relationship with the environment around us is just as it is programming us, we are already programming it at the same time. As the neutrino information of Mars moves through us, the fact of the matter is that those neutrinos go back out in space, and they're traveling at nearly the speed of light. They get back to Mars in a hurry. And it's something to keep in mind about the nature of our relationship with any object, and why objects have certain values is that as long as we generally, as a generic, look upon an object with the same reference, that is what the object itself is imprinted with, which only increases the density of that imprint when the neutrinos are coming in the other direction and are programming us. Okay, but I've traveled quite away from Mars, so let's get to Mars. One of the things to keep in mind about Mars in your design is that basically what you are looking at is that you are looking at an extraordinary energy resource. It's an energy resource, but it's an immature energy resource. In other words, it is something that has a force that lacks refinement. And wherever you look at your Mars in your design, whether it's the personality Mars or it is the unconscious Mars, it's so important to see that the themes where those Mars positions are, the activations, the gates that they're in, the lines that they're in, that there's going to be a demand in this life in order for you to operate correctly, to slowly refine that energy. That energy is going to be subject to outburst. It is going to be subject to immaturity. And the thing to keep in mind is that we're talking about an archetype of a great warrior. It is not that this immaturity in and of itself is something that is eternal. It isn't. It is a process. And one of the most interesting things about Mars is that to live correctly with your Martian energy ultimately is to get to a place of great wisdom when it comes to the use of energy. And again, I'm being specific to the places where the activations are going to be. There is ultimately a maturity that waits down the road. It is a refinement of this energy. Now, it's not like you can do anything about it, after all. I mean, it's not like you can look at your unconscious Mars and its position and understand why you have had those kinds of outbursts out of that particular theme. It isn't going to stop it from happening in the future if your operating is not self. Again, it goes back always in human design to the basics. You have to operate correctly. There are too many things to think about. There are too many things to think about to even imagine that the mind in some way is going to be able to grasp all of this and make your life better. I mean, that's the illusion the mind's always trying to give you. Forget that. All you have to do is operate correctly as yourself, and your Martian energy will mature over time. And those gates where Mars sit, something to keep in mind about those gates. There's extraordinary potential in them. But over time,